What's the craziest thing a person said? Thought it was a joke, but it was real. A customer once tried to claim a warranty because he believed tough was a legally binding challenge, not an adjective. He smashed his tablet against a wall 7 times to test the company's honesty, and then looked me in the eye and asked if false advertising was now legal. I had to call my manager just to make sure I wasn't having a stroke back when I had a part-time job at a small electronics repair shop. Most of my day was pretty normal. Cracked screens, dead batteries, people forgetting their passwords. Nothing exciting. Then one afternoon, this guy walks in holding a completely smashed tablet. Not cracked, obliterated. The screen looked like it lost a fight with a hammer. He calmly places it on the counter and says, "Yeah, it stopped working after I tested its durability." I laughed, like full-on laughed. I thought he was making a joke about dropping it or something. He didn't laugh back. Instead, he leans in slightly and goes, completely serious, "I hit it against a wall about 6 or 7 times. The ad said it was tough, so I wanted to see if that was true. It's not. I'd like a replacement." There was this awkward silence where I was trying to decide if he was messing with me or if I was somehow part of a hidden camera show. I explained very carefully that tough doesn't mean designed to survive intentional destruction. He just stared at me like I was the one being unreasonable and said, "So false advertising is okay now?" I ended up calling my manager because I genuinely didn't know how to respond without sounding sarcastic. The guy waited the whole time, arms crossed, like he was absolutely confident he was about to win this argument. He didn't. Story 2. A stranger at a diner told me he used to delete hours from people's lives for a living until he got caught giving himself too long of a weekend. Then a woman overheard us and joined in by explaining her weekly routine of breathing underwater for 7 days straight. I paid for my coffee and walked out without finishing a single bite. I was volunteering at a late-night roadside diner during a road trip rate, one of those places where strangers randomly start talking like you've known each other for years. This older guy sat across from me, and we started chatting about travel, weird towns, that kind of stuff. Totally normal. At some point, he casually starts talking about unusual experiences he's had. I figured he meant creepy coincidences or maybe something supernatural. I played along, nodding, half interested. Then he says, completely straight-faced, "I used to manage time for a small group of people." I chuckled a bit, thinking he meant scheduling, like a personal assistant or something. He didn't react at all, just kept staring at me and added, "No, not calendars. Actual time. Like slowing it down, speeding it up, removing hours." That's when I realized he wasn't joking. Trying to keep things light, I said something like, "So what, you paused Mondays or something?" hoping he'd laugh and drop it. Instead, he leaned forward and lowered his voice. "Mondays are heavily monitored. You can't touch those." At that point, I stopped smiling. He went on to explain, very seriously, that he had been recruited by some group that exists outside normal reality, and his job was to adjust how people experience time in certain areas. He said he got let go because he stretched a weekend too long for himself, and it caused noticeable inconsistencies. I didn't even know what to say to that. I just nodded like I understood, because arguing felt like the wrong move. Right as I was figuring out how to politely end the conversation, a completely different person at the counter turned around and joined in out of nowhere. She goes, "Yeah, you have to be careful with that stuff. I once tried to breathe underwater for a week to train my body to adapt." I blinked, thinking finally, someone joking. No. She starts explaining her method like it's a fitness routine and suggests I try it sometime, like it's a normal weekend activity. That was my cue. I left my food half finished, paid, and got out of there without looking back. Story 3. A 60-year-old man in full safari gear asked me if he could legally shoot an alligator if the gator asked his dog to get in the water, and the dog consented. He stood there waiting for a serious answer, stone-faced, dead serious, while I looked around for a hidden camera that didn't exist. This man genuinely needed to know how self-defense laws apply to telepathic alligators and suicidal dogs. A guy in his late 60s walks up, dressed head to toe in khaki safari gear, like wide-brimmed hat, vest with a million pockets, the whole deal. He pays for his pass, stares me dead in the eyes, and asks, "Are the alligators here protected?" I tell him yes, absolutely. It's a state preserve. The gators are a keystone species. You can't harm them. He nods slowly, processing this. Then he leans in and lowers his voice like he's about to share a classified secret. "Well, what if one of them steals my dog?" I blink. I tell him that dogs are actually not allowed on the boardwalk for that exact reason. discretion, and it's posted on the signs behind him. He waves his hand dismissively. No, I don't have a dog with me. I'm asking hypothetically. What if I'm walking through a different part of the park, one without a boardwalk, and a gator comes up and steals my dog? Legally speaking, can I shoot it then? I explain again that alligators are federally protected, and you can't discharge a firearm in the preserve regardless. I suggest he keep his hypothetical dog on a leash and away from the water's edge. He sighs like I'm the one being difficult. Then he hits me with the kicker. He looks me straight in the eye, completely stone-faced, and says, "Okay, but here's the scenario. What if the gator doesn't just take my dog? What if the gator asks my dog to get in the water, and my dog wants to go? Is it still stealing if the dog consents? Because that changes the self-defense argument." I laughed. Not a polite chuckle, a full involuntary laugh that I tried to muffle with my hand. I thought he was doing a bit, some kind of weird performance art. I even looked around for a hidden camera. He was not joking. He stood there, waiting for a serious legal analysis of a scenario involving a telepathic, conversational alligator and a suicidal dog. I finally just said, "Sir, I think if the alligator is talking to your dog, we've left the realm of park regulations and you're probably in a fairy tale." He got huffy, said he'd be taking it up with the county, and marched off onto the boardwalk with his binoculars swinging. He came back 3 hours later, bought a water bottle, and asked if I knew the best spot to see an otter. He started normal, asking if the alligators are protected. You answered yes, they are, and explained why. Then he asked what would happen if one took his dog. You told him dogs are not allowed on the boardwalk for safety reasons and pointed to the signs. He kept going with more what-if questions, even though he did not have a dog with him. You stayed calm and explained that alligators are protected and you cannot use a firearm in the park. You suggested keeping any dog on a leash and away from the water. Then he asked a very odd question. What if the alligator talks to the dog and the dog wants to go into the water? Is it still stealing if the dog agrees? He wanted a serious answer about self-defense in that situation. You laughed because it sounded like a silly made-up story, not a real question. You tried to cover your laugh and told him that if an alligator is talking to a dog, we are no longer talking about park rules. It sounds like a fairy tale. He got upset and said he would talk to the county about it. Later he came back, bought a water, and calmly asked about the best place to see an otter. You did not do anything wrong. You answered his questions nicely at first. When the question became too strange, your laugh was a natural reaction. It was not mean. You still gave him a gentle answer and helped him later with the otter question. This man was asking about a talking alligator and a dog that consents to go with it. That is very unusual. Most people would find that funny or confusing too. You showed good patience. You did not yell or ignore him. You treated him respectfully even when his questions got very silly. Final answer, not the a-hole. Before we move on to the next story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me know your favorite part in the comments and share your own story too. Has anything like this ever happened to you? Story 4. A man in a home improvement store told me my potting soil was dead. Not dead as in expired, dead as in it refused to sing back when he sang to it. He demonstrated the exact note he'd been hitting every morning at 7:15 for 3 weeks, then cradled the bag like a baby and left to find a garden center that respects the musicality of its dirt. I was working the returns desk at a big box home improvement store about 8 years ago. It was one of those soul-sucking fluorescent lit places where customers mostly just wanted to yell at you about a faucet they bought in 2017. Anyway, a man approaches my counter pushing a flat cart. On it is a single, unopened bag of premium potting soil, the expensive organic kind with the worm castings. No receipt. I start my usual spiel about looking up the purchase with his card or phone number. He cuts me off. Very calm, very polite, almost serene. He says, "I'm not here to return the soil. I'm here to report that your product is fraudulent." I ask him what the issue is. Was it the wrong pH? Contaminated? Expired? He leans forward, places both palms on the counter, and says, "It says organic on the bag, but I've been testing it for 3 weeks. I've been singing to it every morning, and it refuses to sing back." I stared at him. I actually turned to look at my coworker at the next register to see if she was hearing this. She was pretending to count lottery tickets very intently. I said, "I'm sorry, sir. Did you say singing?" He said yes. Every morning at 7:15 a.m., he'd stand over the pot he'd planted this soil in. Nothing planted in it yet, just the soil by by itself, and he'd sing a G major arpeggio. He demonstrated right there. A very solid G major arpeggio. Held the last note. A woman in the paint aisle stopped what she was doing. He said organic soil, by definition, should contain living microorganisms, and living things respond to frequency. Since his soil hadn't produced a single harmonic response in 3 weeks, he was convinced the organic label was a lie, and he wanted corporate to know they were selling dead, chemical-filled imposter dirt. I asked if maybe he needed to plant something in the soil first for it to, have something to sing back. He looked at me with such pity, like I'd just asked if fish needed water. The soil is the foundation, he said. If the foundation cannot sing, nothing planted in it ever will. I stood there for a long moment. Then I asked if he wanted to return the soil, or just file a complaint. He said he didn't want his money back. He wanted me to personally take the bag into the back room, sing to it myself, and report back if I got a different result. I told him store policy didn't really cover employee-led singing tests for soil responsiveness. He nodded slowly, picked up the bag of potting soil, cradled it in his arms like a baby, and said, "That's fine. I'll find a garden center that respects the musicality of its dirt." Then he walked out, still holding the bag against his chest, and I never saw him again. Story 5. The man in the expensive suit didn't flinch when I told him our coffee was from a landlocked country. He simply slid a small glass vial across the counter, leaned in close enough for me to smell his breath, and whispered, "I can't drink anything that's been held hostage by borders. Now brew this before my palate forgets what the Atlantic Ocean tastes like." One Tuesday around 9 a.m., a man in an expensive suit walks up to the counter. He's staying at the hotel, clearly on a corporate account. He orders a black coffee. I pour it. He takes a sip. His face does this slow transformation from neutral to mildly concerned to absolutely scandalized. He sets the cup down and says, "Is this coffee sourced from a country that has a coastline?" I blinked. I said, "I'm sorry." He repeats the question slower, like I'm the one who misheard. "The beans. The country of origin. Does it have a coastline?" Now, our coffee was a blend. I told him that honestly, I didn't know the specific origin of every bean in the blend, but I could grab the bag from the back if he wanted to see it. He holds up a hand to stop me. Then he leans over the counter, lowers his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, and says, "I don't drink coffee from landlocked countries. The beans don't get the proper mineral influence from sea air during transport. It throws off the ionic balance. You can taste the confinement." I laughed. Genuinely. I thought he was doing some kind of bit, maybe a food critic being performatively absurd. I even said, "Wait, are you filming something?" He was not filming something. His face did not change. He stood there, perfectly still, waiting for me to validate his maritime coffee theory. I explained that our beans were roasted regionally, but the sourcing changed seasonally, so I truly couldn't guarantee a coastal origin. I offered him a tea instead. He declined with visible disgust. Then he said, "This is why I usually bring my own. I have a portable vacuum-sealed container of beans from a single-origin farm in Mozambique. Do you know if Mozambique has a coastline?" I said I was pretty sure it did. He nodded once, sharply, like a detective who just cracked the case. Then he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small glass vial filled with what looked like ground coffee. He handed it to me. "Brew this, and use water that has been sitting out for exactly 47 minutes. Not 46, not 48. The chlorine needs to off-gas to the correct level." I stood there holding this random man's vial of mystery coffee grounds. I looked at my barista, who was frozen mid-sip of her own drink, eyes wide. I brewed it. He watched the entire process with his arms crossed, occasionally nodding. When I handed him the cup, he took a slow sip, closed his eyes, and said, "There. That's what coffee is supposed to taste like. Freedom." He paid for the black coffee he'd originally ordered, the one he accused of tasting like geographic imprisonment, left a $3 tip, and walked toward the elevators carrying his briefcase and his liberated cup. Story 6. The hospice nurse smiled at me across the dinner table, warm and gentle as a lullaby, and said she didn't believe in compassion fatigue. When I asked how she avoided it, she took a slow bite of her salad, chewed, and said, "I don't. I just don't view them as people. They're meat that hasn't stopped breathing yet." Then she offered me her bread roll. I was at a dinner party a few years ago. Small gathering, maybe 8 people, hosted by a mutual friend. I didn't know everyone there super well, but I'd met most of them a handful of times. At one point, I ended up in conversation with a woman who worked as a hospice nurse. She was lovely, warm, soft-spoken, the kind of person you instinctively trust with heavy things. We were chatting about the stress of caregiving, compassion fatigue, that sort of thing. She mentioned how important it was to maintain emotional boundaries so you don't burn out. I nodded and said something like, "Yeah, I can only imagine. I worked in vet medicine for a while and the emotional toll was brutal. I had to learn to compartmentalize or I would have taken every loss home with me." She tilted her head, smiled gently, and said, "Oh, I don't have have that problem. I've never really viewed patients as people. I laughed. I actually set my wine glass down so I wouldn't spill it while laughing. I said, okay, that's dark. I love it. Very gallows humor. She didn't laugh. She kept smiling the same gentle smile and said, no, I'm serious. I think it's the only way to do this work sustainably. If I viewed them as people, with histories, families, hopes, I'd never make it through a shift. So I don't. They're just bodies I'm managing until they stop. The table had gone quiet. Someone across from me was pretending to be very interested in their napkin. I stared at her for what felt like a full minute, waiting for the punchline. For her to say just kidding or that sounded terrible, didn't it? She didn't. She picked up her fork and started eating her salad like she'd just told me the weather. I asked, so when a patient passes away, how do you process that? She chewed thoughtfully, swallowed, and said, I don't. The body stops requiring management. That's the end of it. She then asked me if I wanted the rest of her bread roll because she wasn't going to finish it. I declined. Wow, what a dinner party moment. You were having a nice conversation with a hospice nurse about the emotional side of caregiving. You shared your own experience from vet medicine, talking about how tough it was to not take every loss home with you. Then she calmly drops this, oh, I don't have that problem. I've never really viewed patients as people. You actually laughed because you thought it had to be a joke, some dark humor to lighten the mood. You even set your wine glass down so you wouldn't spill it while chuckling, but she kept that gentle smile and said she was completely serious. She explained that seeing patients as real people with families and feelings would make the job impossible, so she treats them as bodies she manages until they stop. The whole table went silent. Someone across from you suddenly found their napkin extremely interesting. You stared at her, waiting for the just kidding part. It never came. She just picked up her fork and started eating her salad like she had commented on the weather. When you asked how she handles it when a patient passes, she said she doesn't. The body simply no longer needs managing. Then, without missing a beat, she offered you the rest of her bread roll because she wasn't going to finish it. You politely declined. That is one of the most unsettling dinner conversations I have ever heard. You went in expecting a warm chat about compassion fatigue and walked away from someone who basically admitted she turns her heart off like a light switch to get through the day. I'd a verdict. Not the a-hole at all. Before we move on to the next story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me know your favorite part in the comments and share your own story too. Has anything like this ever happened to you? Story 15. This happened about 3 years ago at a friend's engagement party. The crowd was a mix of hipster art school types and corporate finance people, so conversations were already weird. I was standing near the cheese board, making small talk with a quiet woman named Carol who worked in HR. She was maybe 55, wore a pastel cardigan, and had the energy of a retired librarian who knits sweaters for shelter cats. At some point, the conversation drifted to bad bosses. Someone mentioned a manager who made everyone sing happy birthday to him every month. Everyone laughed. Then Carol, still holding a celery stick, said very calmly, I once made a coworker cry so hard she threw up, and then I ate her lunch out of the fridge the next day just to prove a point. I snorted. I actually snorted into my sparkling cider. I looked around for the punchline, expecting her to break character. She didn't. She just took a bite of celery and stared at me with these flat, patient eyes. Wait, I said, still smiling. You're joking, right? She tilted her head like I'd asked something stupid. No. She left her Tupperware unlabeled. That's chaos behavior. I don't negotiate with chaos. I laughed again, nervous this time. I turned to the person next to me, a guy named Derek who worked with Carol. He was slowly backing away, holding his drink like a shield. I whispered, is she for real? Derek didn't whisper back. He just said, she got written up 3 times for aggressive passive lunch enforcement. HR wouldn't fire her because she knows where all the bodies are buried. Metaphorically, I think. Carol overheard this. She smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile someone gives right before they remember your name for a future Tupperware incident. Then she added, completely unprompted, the vomit was her choice. The pasta salad was mine. The room went quiet. Someone dropped a plastic fork. Carol finished her celery, wiped her mouth, and walked away to refill her drink like nothing had happened. Story 16. I used to manage a small independent movie theater, the kind with sticky floors and one screen that shows cult classics at midnight. One Tuesday night, maybe 11 people showed up for a screening of The Big Lebowski. Among them was this guy, probably early 40s, dressed head to toe in denim. Not trendy denim. I mean a denim jacket, denim jeans, denim sneakers, and what looked like a denim bucket hat. He ordered a large popcorn with extra butter and a root beer, then just stood at the counter staring at me. Not talking, staring. I asked if he needed anything else. He leaned in close and said, very quietly, I'm not supposed to be here. The others don't know I left. I laughed. I actually said, oh cool, are you here with a film club or something? something? He shook his head slowly, never blinking. No, I mean the others in my head. There are 7 of us. They voted to stay home tonight because of the carpet pattern, but I'm the rebellious one. Then he tapped his temple twice and whispered, "They're listening right now." I looked at my coworker, a teenager named Marcus who was scooping popcorn. Marcus froze mid-scoop. His eyes went wide. I turned back to Denim Guy and tried to play along, thinking maybe he was doing some weird performance art bit. "So, what's wrong with the carpet pattern?" He glanced down at our stained burgundy carpet, the same carpet that had been there since 1987, and said with absolute disgust, "It has too many right angles. Right angles trap thoughts. The others get claustrophobic." Then he took his popcorn, walked into the theater alone, and sat in the very front row, dead center, facing the screen but not watching it, just sitting, for the entire 2-hour movie. I checked on him twice. He never ate a single kernel, never looked away from the blank screen before the previews even started. When the movie ended, he walked back to the counter, handed me his empty root beer cup, and said, "They liked you. You can come visit sometime. Bring your own pillow." Then he walked out into the night and I never saw him again. Marcus and I stood there in silence for a full minute. Finally, Marcus said, "I'm putting in my 2 weeks tomorrow." He didn't, but he did start locking the front door 15 minutes early every night. Story 17. A woman walks in. She's maybe late 20s, soaking wet from rain, wearing a bridesmaid dress, like full lavender chiffon, the kind with a puffy sleeve situation. No shoes, just bare feet on the tile floor, carrying one high heel. I figured she'd been at a wedding reception and things got messy. Happens all the time. She puts a single sock into a washing machine. No other clothes, just one sock. Then she sits on top of the machine, crosses her legs, and says to me, "I need you to witness something." I laughed and said, "Witness what?" "The spin cycle." She didn't smile, didn't blink, just pointed at the machine and said, "The sock belongs to my sister. She died 7 years ago today. If this machine finishes the cycle without unbalancing, it means she's finally crossed over. If it unbalances, it means she's still angry at me for dating her fiancé." I stopped mopping. I thought she was pulling some elaborate grief prank. I said, "Okay, that's dark humor. Good one." She looked me dead in the eyes and whispered, "I'm not joking. And you're the witness. If you leave before the cycle ends, you'll be haunted by her ghost until you turn 40. Those are the rules." I asked whose rules. She said, "The laundromat's rules. Every laundromat has them. This one's rule is no witnesses left behind." I stood there for 32 minutes watching a single lavender sock spin in a commercial washing machine. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at the window like she was waiting for a sign from heaven or hell. Other customers came in, a guy in a hoodie, a mom with a baby, and she shushed them all, told them to respect the ceremony. The cycle finished. No unbalancing. The machine went silent. She stood up, pulled out the wet sock, hugged it to her chest, and said, "She forgives me." Then she put on her one heel, walked barefoot out into the rain, and disappeared down the street. I locked the door behind her and called my manager at 3:45 a.m. He said I could go home early. I drove home in complete silence. You stood quietly like a patient statue for 32 full minutes, watching one single wet lavender sock tumble alone inside an empty washing machine. A barefoot woman wearing a soaked bridesmaid dress walked in from the rain, carrying only one high heel. She placed that lonely sock in the machine, sat on top of it, and told you this was an important ceremony. She explained that the sock belonged to her sister who had passed away 7 years ago on that very day. If the machine completed the cycle without shaking or stopping, it would mean her sister had finally found peace and crossed over. If it became unbalanced, it would mean her sister remained upset with her for once dating her fiancé. You thought it might be a joke at first and even smiled, but she looked at you with serious eyes and said you must stay as the witness. She added that if you left before the cycle ended, the ghost would follow you until you turned 40 years old. She called these the laundromat's special rules, saying every laundromat has them. You stopped your work and remained right there with her. When other customers entered, she gently asked them to stay quiet and respect the ceremony. You allowed it all to happen without interruption. The machine continued spinning while she sat perfectly still, staring at the window as if expecting a sign from beyond. When the cycle finished smoothly with no problems, she stood up, removed the wet sock, held it gently to her chest, and said her sister had forgiven her. Then she put on her single high heel, walked barefoot back into the falling rain, and disappeared down the street. Afterward, you locked the door and called your manager at 3:45 in the morning to say you needed to leave early. You drove home home in complete silence, still thinking about the strange event. AITA verdict. Not the Ida, you were only doing your normal night shift duties at the laundromat. A woman entered and drew you into her personal moment of remembrance and belief. You did not make fun of her, argue with her, or walk away. Instead, you showed patience by staying and letting her complete what she needed to do. That was a kind and respectful choice. She created the unusual situation, but you handled everything calmly and without any conflict. You deserve to go home early after such an odd experience. You did nothing wrong at all. Before we move on to the next story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me know your favorite part in the comments and share your own story too. Has anything like this ever happened to you? Story 19. Back when I was a receptionist at a small dental clinic, I handled all the appointment scheduling and insurance calls. Boring, repetitive, soul-draining work. Until one Tuesday morning around 9:15. The phone rang. Caller ID showed a local number. I did my cheerful script. Thank you for calling Smile Bright Dental. How can I help you today? A man's voice, elderly and raspy, said, I need you to cancel my wife's root canal. She can't come in anymore. I said, okay, no problem. Asked for her name and date of birth. Found her file. She was scheduled for the following Thursday. I asked if she wanted to reschedule. He said, no. She died 3 years ago. But the appointment reminder postcard showed up yesterday, and she's been crying in the basement ever since. The sound travels through the vents. I stopped typing. I literally pulled the phone away from my ear, stared at it, and put it back. I laughed. Not a mean laugh, more of a confused reflex laugh, and said, Sir, I'm sorry. I think I misheard you. Did you say she's been crying? Every night at 2 a.m. She sits on the old water heater and wails. The root canal reminder opened up old wounds. She hated the dentist. Died of a heart attack in the parking lot of a different dental office, actually. So this is very sensitive. I thought he was doing a prank call. I said, okay, that's pretty funny. Who put you up to this? The line went silent for about 7 seconds. Then he whispered, do you hear that? That clicking sound on your end. That's her. She's in the walls of your building too. She follows the phones. I looked at the wall behind my desk. There was a small vent near the floor. I had never noticed it before. I hung up without canceling the appointment. I called my manager. She said to just note the file as patient deceased. Do not contact. I asked if she'd ever heard anything strange in the vents. She looked at me like I had 3 heads and walked away. Story 20. A talking parrot who fought in the Falklands War gave me 3 days to live, and then the bird screamed goodbye like it already owned my soul. This was during my brief tragic stint as a barista at a hipster coffee shop inside a bookstore. The kind of place where people bring typewriters to write poetry about sadness. I worked with a guy named Trevor who wore fingerless gloves in July and had a man bun so tight it looked like it was hurting his soul. We got along fine, talked about obscure metal bands, debated whether hot dogs are sandwiches, normal stuff. One slow Tuesday afternoon, an elderly woman came in wearing a full tracksuit and holding a parrot on her shoulder. Not a small parrot, a massive, angry-looking macaw. She walked straight to the counter, ignored Trevor completely, pointed at me, and said, you have 3 days to live. The parrot told me. I laughed. I actually slapped the counter and said, oh man, what did I do? Steal his cracker. She didn't laugh. Trevor didn't laugh. The parrot tilted its head and made a low growling sound. The woman leaned closer and whispered, his name is General Beekman. He fought in the Falklands War. He's never been wrong about a death prediction. Not once. 3 days. You should write goodbye letters. I looked at Trevor for backup. Trevor was slowly backing away toward the pastry case. He mouthed the words, she comes here every week. I said, man, that's a parrot. Parrots don't fight in wars. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her tracksuit pocket and slid it across the counter. It was a crudely drawn map of our town with an X marked near the post office. She said, that's where you'll die. Crosswalk. A blue sedan. License plate has the number 7 in it. Don't try to change it. Fate doesn't accept returns. Then she turned around, walked out, and the parrot screamed goodbye as the door closed. I spent the next 3 days in a state of paranoid terror. I didn't cross any streets. I called in sick. I watched my apartment window like a hawk. Day 1, nothing. Day 2, nothing. Day 3, I stayed in bed until midnight, then laughed at myself for being ridiculous. The next morning, I went back to work. Trevor asked how I survived. I said, see? Stupid bird. That afternoon, a blue sedan with a 7 in the license plate ran a red light and crashed into the front window of the coffee shop. Nobody got hurt, but it smashed the exact spot where I always stood, the register position I would have been working if I hadn't called in sick. Story 21. A 12-year-old in rocket ship pajamas showed up at at my door at midnight holding 2 eggs and declared an egg war because my aunt owes his family a debt from 1998 with a 6,000% interest rate. It was a kid, maybe 12 years old, wearing pajamas with little rocket ships on them, holding a single raw egg in each hand. No parents in sight, no car, just this kid standing there in the dark. I opened the door a crack and said, you lost, buddy? He looked up at me with these huge, unblinking eyes and said, I'm here to collect the debt. I laughed. I actually did that awkward adult laugh where you're trying to be nice to a child. I said, what debt, little dude? I don't even live here. He didn't smile, didn't shift his weight, just stood there like a tiny statue and said, your aunt owes my family 73 eggs. She borrowed them in 1998 for a cake competition and never returned them. The interest rate is 1 egg per year. That's 105 eggs now, but I'm authorized to accept 73 tonight if you sign this. He pulled a crumpled piece of notebook paper from his pajama pocket. It had the words EGG debt written at the top in crayon, followed by a list of dates and numbers that looked like someone had done the math wrong on purpose. I said, okay, this is a prank, right? Did my cousin put you up to this? Is there a camera? The kid very slowly raised one of the eggs to chest level and said, this is not a prank. My family has collected egg debts for 6 generations. We have never been stiffed. If you refuse, I am required to leave this egg on your doorstep as a declaration of war. You don't want egg war. Trust me. I stared at him. He stared back. One of my aunt's cats jumped onto the counter behind me. I heard the tiny thud and froze, waiting for the kid to react. He didn't even glance past me, just kept eye contact like a small, terrifying awe. I said, I don't have 73 eggs. I have maybe 6 eggs in the fridge. He nodded once, very seriously, and said, partial payment accepted. I'll return tomorrow for the rest. My name is Bartholomew. Remember it. Then he placed 1 egg on the doorstep, turned around, and walked off into the darkness. I stood there holding the front door, watching a 12-year-old in rocket ship pajamas disappear down the street, carrying a single egg. I called my aunt. She laughed for 3 straight minutes, then went quiet and said, wait, the neighbor's last name is Bartholomew, and I did borrow eggs for a cake in the 90s. Oh no. You opened the door at 11 o'clock at night to a 12-year-old boy in rocket ship pajamas holding 2 raw eggs. He stood perfectly still and told you your aunt owed his family 73 eggs from 1998, plus interest that somehow made it 105. He even had a crumpled notebook paper with EGG debt written in crayon and a list of numbers. You laughed at first and asked if it was a prank, but he stared at you with big unblinking eyes and warned that refusing would start an egg war. You told him you only had 6 eggs in the fridge. He accepted 1 as partial payment, left the other on your doorstep as a warning, introduced himself as Bartholomew, and walked away into the dark like a tiny, serious collector. You just stood there watching him go while one of your aunt's cats jumped on the forbidden kitchen counter behind you. Then you called your aunt, who first laughed and then remembered she really did borrow eggs from the neighbors decades ago. You let a child in pajamas make you freeze in place and accept his strange egg rolls without closing the door or calling any adult. ITA verdict. Not the Ida you were house-sitting and simply answered the door when someone knocked late at night. The boy created a very odd situation with his egg debt story, but you stayed calm, spoke to him politely, and did not argue or scare him. You listened, offered what you had, and later called your aunt to check the story. That was a safe and kind way to handle it. You did nothing wrong. It turned out to be a real old neighbor debt, so your caution was understandable. Before we move on to the next story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me know your favorite part in the comments, and share your own story too. Has anything like this ever happened to you? Story 22. A guy tried to return a 7-year-old ceiling fan because it whispered his ex-wife's name during a thunderstorm, and when I said no, he warned me the fan would be whispering my name next since its revenge range is 2 miles. I was working the returns desk at a big home improvement store, you know, the place with the orange aprons. It was a sleepy Wednesday afternoon, barely any customers, and I was mentally composing my grocery list. Then this guy walks up, early 60s, wearing a fluorescent yellow vest like he just came from a construction site, carrying a single ceiling fan box, not a new fan. The box was beaten up, taped and retaped, with return written on it in Sharpie about 6 times. I opened my mouth to ask for his receipt. He cut me off, leaned both elbows on the counter, and said with absolute deadpan seriousness, I need to return this fan because it whispered my ex-wife's name during a thunderstorm last Tuesday. I can't sleep in the same house as it anymore. My new girlfriend is allergic to ghost gossip. I laughed, a loud, snorty, embarrassing laugh that echoed echoed through the entire returns department. I said, "Sir, that's the best joke I've heard all week. What's really wrong with it? Motor noise? Remote control issues?" He didn't smile, didn't blink. He just pulled a small notebook from his vest pocket, flipped to a page covered in what looked like chicken scratch handwriting, and pointed to it. "See this? I documented the times. 11:47 p.m., 12:03 a.m., 1:22 a.m. Each time clear as day," it whispered. "Margaret. My ex-wife's name is Margaret. We divorced in 2004 because she said I lacked spiritual awareness." Well, who's laughing now, Margaret? The fan knows. I looked around for a manager. No one. I looked at the fan box. It had a barcode from 2017. I said, "Sir, this fan is 7 years old. Our return policy is 90 days. He slammed his palm on the counter and whispered, "You don't understand. Last night, it started humming show tunes. Show tunes, kid. Margaret loved show tunes. It's learning." I said, "I really can't take this back. It's used. It's old. It's fine." He grabbed the box, hugged it like a baby, and turned to leave. Then he stopped, looked over his shoulder, and said, "But when this fan starts whispering your name tonight because you rejected it, don't say I didn't warn you. Its range is 2 miles. I live 4 blocks away. Sleep tight." Then he walked out. I watched him load the fan box into the back of a pickup truck covered in bumper stickers that all just said, "Trust nothing." Story 23. A retired chiropractor at my cousin's wedding told me bones don't break. They intelligently decide to separate temporarily, and then blamed my grandfather's fatal heart attack on emotional illiteracy, while smiling like he was describing the weather. This happened last year at a cousin's wedding reception. I was seated at a table with relatives I barely knew, including an older gentleman named Harold who smelled like menthol cough drops and had one of those walrus mustaches that looked like it had its own zip code. He seemed harmless, talked about his garden a lot, complained about the potato salad being too adventurous. After dinner, someone mentioned that my uncle had broken his leg in a biking accident. Normal sympathy responses all around. Then Harold leaned forward, tapped the table twice, and said, "Bones don't break. They just decide to separate temporarily." I stopped chewing my cake. I said, "Wait, what? Like, medically? Bones absolutely break." Harold shook his head with the calm confidence of a man who had never been wrong about anything in his entire life. "No, bones are intelligent. They have memory. When a bone breaks, it's actually choosing to restructure itself. The impact is just an excuse. Your uncle wanted that leg to change. The bike was a messenger." I looked around the table. My cousin was staring at her champagne glass. Her husband was suddenly very interested in his napkin. Nobody was laughing. Nobody was saying, "Oh, Harold, you old jokester." I said, "Okay, so what about a heart attack? Does the heart just decide to take a vacation?" Harold smiled. It was not a kind smile. The heart never attacks itself. That's a myth. People's hearts stop because they forget how to feel correctly. It's an emotional literacy issue, not a medical one. I said, "Harold, my grandfather died of a heart attack. Are you saying he forgot how to feel?" The table went silent. Harold looked me dead in the eyes and said, "I'm saying he felt the wrong things for too long. His heart got tired of waiting for him to learn." I pushed my chair back. I walked away. I found my mother by the dessert table and asked her who this man was. She sighed and said, "That's Aunt Carol's new husband. He's a retired chiropractor who thinks germs are government propaganda. Just don't mention viruses." Last Thanksgiving, he spent 40 minutes explaining why polio was actually a hoax by the mattress industry. I didn't go back to the table. I ate my cake standing next to the punch bowl, watching Harold explain something about gravity being optional to a captive audience of uncomfortable relatives. Story 24. A 60-year-old woman in cat print pajamas and a leather tool belt came to my motel front desk at 2 a.m. demanding I open room 217 because she was about to remove her cheating husband's kneecaps with a rusty screwdriver, and she wanted me to know she'd already performed surgery with a butter knife in Reader's Digest in 1987 when I was 22. Working as a night auditor at a small motel off the highway, the kind of place that rents by the hour but pretends it doesn't. My shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Most nights were boring. People checking in, people asking for extra towels, people crying in the parking lot. Normal stuff. Around 2 a.m. one night, a woman in her 60s came to the front desk. She was wearing a floor-length nightgown covered in cartoon cats, fuzzy slippers, and a look of absolute determination. She slammed a laminated ID card on the counter and said, "I need you to open room 217. My husband is in there with a prostitute. I'm going to remove his kneecaps with this." She pulled a rusty screwdriver from her nightgown pocket. Not a small one. A full-sized industrial, I'm building a deck screwdriver. I laughed. I actually laughed because my brain refused to accept that a grandmother in cat pajamas was threatening violence at 2 a.m. I said, "Ma'am, that's a screwdriver. You can't remove kneecaps with a screwdriver." She didn't laugh. She leaned over the counter, pointed the screwdriver at my face, and whispered, "You'd be surprised what I can remove." I removed a man's appendix once with a butter knife and a copy of Reader's Digest. That was 1987. I've gotten better since then. I said, "Okay, that's a joke." "You're joking." She opened her nightgown slightly. Underneath, she was wearing a leather tool belt, full of screwdrivers, wrenches, and what looked like a small bone saw. She said, "I'm a retired battlefield surgeon. I've operated on 3 continents. I once sewed a man's ear back on using dental floss and sheer force of will. Your little motel lock isn't going to stop me. So either you open the door, or I open it myself and charge you for the damages." I called my manager. He didn't pick up. I called the police. They said they'd send someone in 30 to 40 minutes. The woman started tapping the screwdriver on the counter like a metronome. I said, "I can't open another guest's room without a warrant or an emergency." She smiled. It was the worst smile I've ever seen. "Fine, but when you hear screaming, don't come running. You had your chance to help." Then she walked toward the hallway, tool belt jingling with every step. I sat behind the counter for 20 minutes listening. No screaming, no sound at all. Then I saw the door to room 217 open. The woman walked out alone, wiped something off her screwdriver with a handkerchief, nodded at me, and left through the front entrance. You sat behind the front desk at 2 in the morning while a 60-year-old woman in a long nightgown covered with cartoon cats and fuzzy slippers marched up and slammed her ID on the counter. She calmly announced that her husband was in room 217 with a prostitute and that she planned to remove his kneecaps using a large rusty screwdriver she pulled from her pocket. When you laughed and told her a screwdriver could not do that, she leaned in close, pointed it at your face, and whispered that she had once removed a man's appendix with only a butter knife and a copy of Reader's Digest back in 1987. She then opened her nightgown to reveal a full leather tool belt underneath, complete with wrenches, more screwdrivers, and a small bone saw. She claimed to be a retired battlefield surgeon who had worked on 3 continents and once sewed a man's ear back on with dental floss. She demanded you open the room or she would do it herself and bill the motel for any damage. You called your manager and the police, but neither arrived quickly. She tapped the screwdriver on the counter while waiting. After 20 minutes of silence, she walked down the hallway, the tool belt jingling with every step. Later, you saw her exit room 217 alone, wipe the screwdriver with a handkerchief, give you a nod, and leave through the front door as if nothing unusual had happened. You stayed seated the whole time and did nothing to stop her. ITA verdict. Not the Ida, you were working your night shift alone and faced a very strange and threatening situation. You tried to handle it calmly by calling your manager and the police for help. You explained that you could not open another guest's room without proper reason. When the woman went down the hallway anyway, you stayed at your post and waited. You did not argue with her or try to physically stop her, which was the safest choice in that moment. Nothing loud or obvious happened afterward, and she left peacefully. You acted responsibly under difficult circumstances and did nothing wrong. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Got a story to share? Drop it in the comments and let us know which one was your favorite.